Hey everyone, today I want to do a reaction video to an article that I saw about a trans athlete competing in an alpine ski race, which is my sport. I quickly skimmed the article, but I thought it'd be interesting to go into detail about what happened and give you my thoughts as a professional alpine ski racer. So let's get into it. So the title of the article is Exclusive, Trans Skier Won Women's Heat at the High School California-Nevada State Competition, and is slammed by father competitor who says anyone with a brain knows that boys who have gone through male puberty should not race against girls. And then it goes on, Watterson, who is currently a sophomore at Davis Senior High School, took first place in the women's heat on March 6th with a combined result of 108.29, beating Charlie Chandler, who came in second by 17 seconds. Okay, for those of you who don't know too much about alpine ski racing, competitions and races are won by hundredths of a second. Not 17 seconds, not seconds, but hundredths of a second. First and 10th place might be displaced by a second, but 17 seconds? We're not talking about an endurance race, a marathon, a triathlon, where the race itself is like hours long and 17 seconds is a good gap between competitors. Here in alpine ski racing, with a race of 1minute 8 seconds, to be beaten by 17 seconds is absolutely insane. It's being destroyed. There's no way about it. It is an unfair competition at that point. Then it goes on to say, the concerned parent spoke to Daily Mail exclusively, but asked to remain anonymous. Okay, we need to have a conversation about this, because we are asking women athletes and young girls to boycott competitions with trans athletes. But in this case, these are young girls, high school students, with parents who are present. And for not even parents to be able to speak up and feel as though they're comfortable protecting their children and speaking up for them, then what does that say about this type of society and culture we are creating? As a parent, it's your responsibility to protect your daughter and give her a positive, competitive environment to grow, thrive, and develop. Letting her compete against a transgender athlete who will absolutely destroy her is doing nothing to support her as an athlete. And then it goes on, knowing that others who have spoken out against trans athletes have been met with relentless backlash, and he hoped to protect his daughter's privacy. Then it goes on, hormones and drugs are just introducing drugs into sport. It's not fair on the girls. I'm all about being inclusive and accepting people, but they have men racing in women's sports, the parent said. I love this, and I thought it was a really good point, and it's actually something I thought about as well. Let's say one of the requirements for trans athletes to compete against biological women is to lower their testosterone levels to 5 nanomoles per liter. Most women have testosterone levels between 0.5 and 1.7 nanomoles per liter. So in theory, if they're being forced to compete against a trans athlete, a man, who has elevated levels of testosterone, what would prevent them from wanting to raise their testosterone levels by taking exogenous testosterone to try and level the playing field? However, it's my belief that a fundamental value of sports is that everyone should compete on a fair playing field. Because if not, you're gonna have the rich and wealthy who can afford the best doctors and drugs, while the poor and marginalized basically become second-class athletes. That's not what sports is about. You wanna see the underdog win, the athlete that went from nothing to world champion. That cannot happen if you don't have a level playing field. If you introduce doping and cheating into sports, it's over. And that's where we're heading by allowing biological men to compete against women. Women will become second-class athletes because women won't be on the podium anymore and women won't hold any world records. So on that point, I agree. Doping and drugs should not be introduced into sports. And then he goes on to say, it's pretty clear to me or anyone with a brain that if you're going through or have gone through male puberty, then you should only race against people who have gone through or are going through male puberty. Again, I would agree, but who are you sharing this with? Are you talking to the other parents, the race organizers, or just sharing it anonymously with the Daily Mail? Then below, they go on to talk about June Watterson, who is the trans athlete. Watterson has openly spoken about her transition on social media, just 2 weeks ago posting a picture of herself at the Redwood Red Pack Regional Cycling Petaluma Roundup. She said she was only 6 months into taking estrogen and was still competing in the men's heat for the competition. So, only 6 months on testosterone suppressants. So, that's obviously fair. And it's never going to be fair, but I mean, only 6 months. I don't want to condone kids and teenagers taking testosterone hormones and drugs. So like just the idea that she's on these drugs doesn't sit well with me. But the fact that she's only been on them for 6 months and then is competing with girls in alpine ski racing is totally not right. And it's not fair. It's never going to be fair, but it's just not right. So the ability to compete in women's skiing, but presumably forced to compete against men in cycling, tells me that the trans inclusion policies in skiing are much less stringent than those in cycling. So we have to understand that ski racing is a very niche sport in North America. And actually the reason why I want to share this article with you is because it's the first case that I've come across where you have a trans athlete competing in alpine ski racing. And then when I read that she won by 17 seconds, which completely blew my mind because never in the history of alpine skiing have I ever seen a race where someone's won by 17 seconds. So that was like a shock to me. And then the fact that no one did anything about it, I was very, I was very surprised. I'm kind of still in a loss for words, but I thought I would share my thoughts with you about it, and it might be interesting to get like an inside perspective on this story. Okay, so then down below, here's the father talking about his daughter. I asked her how she felt. She said she was supportive and her team had come to terms with it, the parent said. So from reading this, it's clear to me that none of these girls really want to compete with this trans athlete, but they were forced into this situation, which seems to be allowed by the race organizers and the organizing body of this competition. Obviously, yes, they could have protested and refused to compete, but what, we're gonna put that responsibility on high school girls when parents are there present and witnessing the situation? I mean, personally, one day I hope to be a mother, and I would like to think if I was in this situation with my daughter being forced to compete against a trans athlete, they would hear from me. I would be protesting the shit out of this race. And then the father goes on to say, these kids are kids and live in a world adults have created. I don't blame the winning athlete. This is a failure at the administrative level and higher. So I think two things need to be mentioned here. First, the trans athlete didn't do anything illegal. They were allowed to compete and they competed. And that means the rules need to change. And second, he's blaming the administrative people and higher. And fair enough, but what about your responsibility as a parent to protect your kids and represent them and their best interests? It seems like everybody's pointing fingers, but nobody's willing to do the dirty work. If you stand up, others will support you, I promise. It's like me and this YouTube channel. I was on the sidelines, watching race after race, women being beaten unfairly by biological men. At some point, I had to ask myself, am I gonna continue to let this happen? Or am I gonna stand up and do something about it? I get it. It's not easy or comfortable to put your face out there and your name out there for all to see. But let me assure you, if you take that leap of faith, others will reach out and support you. I'm not saying there won't be hate or negativity, but if you speak from the heart and people can see that you're speaking up for something you truly are passionate about and believe in, you will be met with overwhelming positivity. It only takes one person to lead. And if you do it well, others will follow. So just to finish this point, we all need to ask ourselves, at what point do we stand up and actually do something about it instead of waiting for things to change? Okay, moving on. I'll point out the obvious. You ruin women's sports by allowing males to compete in women's sports. And then farther down it says, in a bid to see women compete in a fair environment, the parent said he was shocked and appalled that his daughter had to just come to terms with Watterson taking the win. Speaking for parents of female athletes, are we just expected to come to terms with this? No amount of hormone therapy or reconstructive surgery will change the biological, muscular, and skeletal differences between those born with XX and those born with XY chromosomes, he said. I would agree. It's one thing to read about these things happening in other places and quite another to witness it firsthand. This injustice to young women cannot continue anywhere, especially not on my doorstep. Again, I agree with everything he's saying, but what are you going to do about it, other than speak anonymously to a reporter? Obviously, we're getting this article, so the wider audience gets to read about it, but How much change is it having at a local level to change the inclusion policy for the future races? Then it goes on, after her win, Watterson posted to social media with pictures from the March event, knowing that being state champion felt unreal. Seriously, it wasn't that hard being a bunch of girls by 17 seconds. And honestly, if I was in her position, I don't think I'd feel very good about it. It's one thing to have a close race, and quite another to absolutely destroy your competition by 17 seconds, which, by the way, your competition are a bunch of young girls. There's no dignity or pride in that. I would not call this a win. And then June Watterson goes on to say, all those days of hard training paid off. I couldn't be happier with the results. I just want to thank my team who have all supported me so much this season, she said in a post along with photos and videos. All my coaches are amazing, and I'm so proud of my lovely teammates. It's taking a lot of work and dedication for us to get here, but we did it. We did it? No. You absolutely destroyed them. That's what happened. It wasn't a win. It wasn't something to be proud of. You absolutely destroyed them. And reality check, I don't think they really want you there, competing against them. And honestly, I'd be curious to know, did it even occur to this trans athlete how their teammates felt about being beaten by 17 seconds? Do you think they were happy? Because I can guarantee you, being absolutely crushed in a competition unfairly doesn't feel good. Anyways, June goes on to say, individual state champions in both women's and men's. So they're competing in both women's and men's division. That's just bananas. Why even have categories anymore? If men can compete against women and women can compete against men, let's just have one big open human category of competition. That seems fair to me, and at least trans athletes at that point won't be on the podium. That's a guarantee. Then the article goes on to say, the concerned parent said he felt as though kids these days are being brainwashed into being supportive. I think some kids certainly are, but there are others who disagree, who are just being forced into being supportive. Either way, it's just a very unsettling environment that kids are growing up in these days. And then he goes on to say, but you have to point out that this male won. He displaced the girls, he said. Even if you didn't finish on the podium, he still pushed you down the list even further. What about next year? This isn't going away until people speak up. Yes, we need to speak up. Now, I'm going to try to be positive because at least he spoke to a reporter about it, anonymously. But I'm sure there are many other parents who also disagreed and did absolutely nothing about it other than complain amongst themselves. So at least we have this story and we get to hear about it. Then the article goes on, the bylaws do not specifically note how men and women are categorized. However, the California Interscholastic Federation follows gender identity participation rules, which were first implemented in 2013. That means that any transgender student can compete in athletics and activities which is consistent with their gender identity, the guide adds. Athletes will participate in programs consistent with their gender identity or the gender most consistently expressed. So basically, it's a free-for-all. Compete with whoever or whomever you'd like. We don't care. Competitions, medals, and rankings are triggering anyways. Let's just give everyone a participation ribbon and call it a day, shall we? All right, moving on. It's going to get to a point where the top 10 are all men. The solution is obvious. Have an open class in every sport so it doesn't matter. Hopefully we can get there. Yes, hopefully we can get there. But if we don't do anything about it, if we don't start standing up for what's right, then we're not going to get there. Nothing's going to change if you don't do anything about it. And then it goes on, I can't believe this has become an issue. The House of Reps introduced the bill to protect women's sports, but not a single Democrat voted for it. And it astounds me that this has become a partisan issue. We just need common sense. Okay, so the rest is mostly politics, and I don't really want to get into that. So my takeaway from this article is that number one, the issue of trans athletes competing in women's sports is happening across the board. So every sport needs to introduce new guidelines and rules preventing biological men from competing against biological women. And number two, we need to stop pointing fingers at others and start directing that towards ourselves and asking ourselves, what are we doing about it? What are we doing as athletes, parents of athletes, sports enthusiasts, and concerned citizens? What are we doing to protect women's and young girls' sports? Anyways, if you're an athlete or a parent who's concerned about this or experiencing it, please reach out. I'm more than happy to be a sounding board or help in any way that I can. That's the end of this article, or at least the parts that I want to touch on. I have new videos every single week, so please like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my future ones. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.